Oh, do you
So
really put those on the same level?
I absolutely do.
Racism and sexism, you put it on the
Absolutely.
same level as cultural appropriation?
That's exactly.
So if somebody wears their hair like you're wearing it, you put that on the same level as racism?
Absolutely. I put that on the same level as white supremacy, because white supremacy is intersectional.
The only people who are actually offended by cultural appropriation don't really have anything else of meaning going on in their lives, it seems.
Yeah.
Well, that's rich.
Yeah.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope all's good wherever you are. In this video, we're going to watch a debate on cultural appropriation. Some of the people in this debate on Dr. Phil, you might know them: Amalek Panobi, Will Witt from PragerU. If you watch any conservative content, you'll be familiar with them. The first segment is the cultural appropriation of food. Let's get it.
So raise your hand if you've ever eaten Mexican food cooked by an American, or sushi by someone who isn't Japanese. Is that appropriation?
No.
No?
No.
Well, Angela, you say not only is food being appropriated, but it needs to stop. Tell me what you mean.
So when it comes to food, it's not necessarily that people of another culture can't enjoy other people's cuisines. That's not the point I'm making in terms of cultural appropriation. What I'm saying is the idea of profiting off of that. So like I mentioned, TikTok creators, for example. I recently wrote an article. I'm a food writer for a website called The Takeout. I wrote an article about TikTok creators sharing a specific drink called, well, they called it spa water, but it's actually agua fresca, which is something that comes from Mexican culture, Latino culture. It's a drink that is water, sugar, and like blended fruits and vegetables. So the issue there is that white creators on TikTok are sharing this particular drink. They're profiting off of it in the sense of they're gaining attention from it, they're gaining views, and they're also giving it a new name. This drink already existed, it's part of a culture. I feel like it's very simple to give credit where credit's due.
And compensation.
And compensation to who?
Well, for one thing, let's think about Jack Daniels and the enslaved person that created that recipe. It would be nice to let his family benefit from that rather than having Jack Daniels' family become millionaires.
So they would have to track down the creator of Agua Fresca, hope that they still have family alive, and give them some of the money they've made off the TikToks they've created?
I don't think it's specifically that. It's not, I'm, at least me personally.
You don't think they need to be compensated?
I'm saying that on TikTok in this particular sense, because social media plays a role in it. That's how things are shared nowadays. If this particular white creator is gaining, 2 million views from their recipe of spa water, knowing that it comes from a specific culture, I just think that's not right. I don't understand why that can't be acknowledged. She could have done her research. I mean, I know
So
she
anytime
did.
we cook something, we need to research everything about it?
I think when you share it online, you have a responsibility, yes.
And if you're claiming it, it's yours. That's why when people create things, they do research to see what else is out there. You can only go so far to say, I didn't know. But once you know, you can't unknow that. That's what I'm saying. So there has to be credit. And we're not necessarily talking about there has to be reparations. We're talking about respect and humanity for somebody from whom you've stolen. Cultural appropriation is not criminal, but it is ethical. But people have a right to make a decision about what is ethical. And once you know, you can't unknow that, Dr. Phil.
One of the things that bothers me is when I see this happen on the internet. I mean, they just attack them, and that doesn't help. And I mean, they really go after them.
But where might that be coming from, though? Where might that be coming from? Anger is an expression of something.
Hurt,
so where
fear,
might
and
that,
frustration.
exactly. And if we talk about this, and that's what seems to be missing again from the conversation, is where's the history of this? And all of this is about education. All of this is about education. But I would like to think that each person here is a lifelong learner. And once you know this, you can't unknow this. So this is not about, which is what was brought up earlier about how are you supposed to know this? And nobody's trying to ask anybody to know everything. In fact, that's why we're still learning this. But if somebody has told you that this bothers me, the response should not be, well, it shouldn't. And I don't think anybody here is trying to say anybody is speaking on behalf of one. What I am saying is that we can educate it and learn more about what we are talking about so that we don't do it again.
This is just absolute nonsense. I like how the one girl singled out white creators, and that man with the braids, the black gentleman, sitting there in a suit that is definitely from European culture. This is ridiculous. So what if you're a black creator on TikTok and you happen to make a hamburger recipe? You gotta lay out the history that it came from medieval Russia and in the 14th century was brought back by the Germans. Give me a break. This is really a Western problem. Anywhere else in the world, people are happy to share their traditions and their culture. I live in Southeast Asia. My wife's Thai. We got a lot of Japanese friends. We spent a lot of time in Japan. And when you go there, they're happy for you to wear the kimono and the yukata. And actually in Japan, when you're there, there's a big part of the society who's really into American, old like Western movie culture. The cowboy boots, the cowboy hat, Harley Davidson, really into it. Our whole culture in the West is a melting pot of cultural appropriation. You dummies. The whole idea of having a civilization like we have is to share food with one another, to share recipes, to share our music, to share our jokes and our stories and our culture. I remember seeing an article once, or maybe it was on a YouTube video, about hoop earrings being cultural appropriation, that the American Latinas were very upset that white women were wearing hoop earrings. Hoop earrings? Hoop earrings, really? Like, where does it stop, right? Is language going to be cultural appropriation? Y'all come to America, Canada, start to speak English. Do you have to always give credit for the language? I mean, that professor seems like he's made an entire career of literally appropriating Western culture. An entire career. He's very successful because of Western culture. What about when a black woman dyes her hair blonde? Where does it stop? This is so ridiculous. Let's get back to the video.
Kim Kardashian is part Armenian. Is it okay for her to wear cornrows?
I personally think that it depends on what boundaries that culture has set. So I can speak for Black culture. The reason why, you know, some of us are offended and have problems with white women wearing braids is because it's documented. Black women are getting fired from their jobs for wearing braids. We are called ghetto. We are not seen as professional with our natural cultural hairstyles that are part of Black culture. And then when white women wear them, they are glorified, praised, and even sometimes have the credit attributed to them. So that discrepancy is where the issue comes into play.
If I could respond to that, I think you can speak for yourself as an individual as far as whether or not you are offended by something, but you can't speak on behalf of the entire Black culture. There are plenty of Black people who watched what Kim Kardashian did and thought the braids looked absolutely fine. And again, I do think imitating is flattery. She didn't step up and say that she's invented the hairstyle. If people attribute that to her, that's something that you do on an individual basis.
I feel like it's important to understand the difference between imitating and actually appropriating. So imitating is like, you like my nails, you go do it, you copy it. Imitating, you like my shoes, buy the same shoes. Sure. Appropriating is when you are copying something of a culture that is not yours, and it's inappropriate. You are disrespecting the boundary that that culture has set.
If I copied your shoes tomorrow because I liked them, would that not be appropriation?
I have not set a boundary against you about the shoes I wear. I don't face discrimination or racism because of the shoes that I wear.
So if I, as a biracial, half-Black woman, go to Kim Kardashian and say, you know what, that's not a boundary that I've set for you. You may wear cornrows. And I am essentially a Black person who has told her I don't have that boundary. Is it then wrong for her to wear the braids the next day?
That comes into play. If you do that, you're going to ignore there's countless documentation of a lot of Black women being discriminated and experiencing racism because of braids. So by doing that, you're kind of just dismissing and ignoring the Black women that are struggling with this issue, especially because you have to think Kim Kardashian has an extremely large platform. Mm-hmm. So what she does, her fans see as law and see as she can do no wrong. So if she is seen as something as being that it's okay, they're going to copy her, which will.
Well, what do the rest of y'all think? You guys wait. Go ahead.
I think the existence of a double standard that is unfairly being applied to Black women about their hairstyles doesn't necessitate that Kim Kardashian, we need a rule that she's not allowed, that all white women are not allowed to wear this hairstyle. Like Amla said, another Black woman could not be offended by that, and who gets to be the one whose rules are applied to all of society.
Because you know firsthand what it's like to be called out, threatened, and abused online for appropriating another culture. What happened?
It was my prom, and I went to a vintage thrift shop. I found a whole entire aisle of cheap out dresses, which was the name of the dress that I had worn. There were all different colors and styles, and I found one that had fit me well. I thought it was beautiful, and I bought it. And I wore it to my prom. I posted about it on Twitter, and I immediately received backlash following a specific comment saying that my culture is not your prom dress.
So you got backlash for
wearing the dress, yes.
and it said that you were appropriating a culture?
Yes,
And you actually got death threats?
I did. I got called all sorts of names. I got death threats. I got people threatening to send things to my high school. It was scary.
There's a famous chef named Rick Bayless, and this guy made it famous for cooking Mexican food. He was a white guy that really loved Mexican food, Mexican culture, still does, I'm sure. He opened a Mexican restaurant, and people just went off on him. They were so pissed that this guy was a white guy cooking Mexican food. Now, this man had learned how to cook Mexican food, authentic Mexican food and dishes, and he went to these villages and these small towns in Mexico where people, if any of you have been to Mexico, love sharing their food with people. This guy was essentially a Mexican cuisine scholar, but because he was white, they tried to cancel him. Yeah, Rick Bayless, you actually look that guy up. The guy has books on Mexican food, always praising Mexican culture, always gives credit where credit's due, and people try to cancel him. Let's get back to the video.
These are all celebrities who have been called out, criticized, and condemned for cultural appropriation. Has anyone here ever called someone out for cultural appropriation? You too? You have? You have? Yep. Has anybody here ever thought twice about wearing something or doing something, even cooking something, out of fear of being accused of appropriation? You have?
Yes.
Yeah, what was it?
My daughter had braids, and she wanted me to get braids that were just like hers.
Why her but not you?
She's half black and half white.
Okay.
And so I just think that some things should stick with those cultures.
Well, no matter whether you believe it's harmful or you think people should just be allowed to do what they want, there is no doubt this is a hot button topic that people are passionate about. Dr. Neil Lester, a professor of English at Arizona State University, right?
I am, yes.
And you've published, lectured, and taught extensively the area of African American studies. What do you think about appropriation? Do you think this is a real thing, something that people need to be cognizant of? And if so, why?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, because if we in fact are trying to look at the humanity of other people, and we are trying to live in a place where we are trying to be respectful and mindful of folks, then we need to be aware of things that are important to other cultures that don't necessarily look like us or share the same values. So it is a thing, and people need to be aware of.
Can anybody appropriate?
Anybody can appropriate, yes.
Not just white people?
Absolutely. Appropriation is intersectional. So old people can appropriate youth culture can appropriate old folks. People who are not incarcerated can impersonate prisoners or those who are incarcerated. Men appropriate women's attire for the sake of funny and mocking. So absolutely anybody can do it, and everybody on some level may have flirted with it.
Okay, but a lot of the time that people that I've seen are called out for this, it's not that they were making fun or mocking in some way. It was just that they had adopted a fashion or a style or whatever.
I would say that's a performance. So if somebody's culture and somebody's identity becomes a performance, then it's reductive. So if you're reducing, for example, say the civil rights movement to an afro, and you wear that, or you wear dreadlock wigs, that Rastafarians may wear, you do that because it's edgy, because it's cool, but ultimately because it's not you, and you're getting some kind of cultural capital from that by doing it.
And who's hurt by that?
Well, it's not a matter of who's hurt by it, it's who's being disrespected by it.
Well, who's being disrespected by it?
A whole culture of people whose identities are wrapped in whatever you're dressing into and can then take off.
Amala, you don't agree?
I don't, no.
You think worrying about appropriation is a waste of time?
I think not only is it somewhat a waste of time, but it's nearly impossible. You just mentioned there are nearly hundreds of ways that one could appropriate somebody else's culture or their livelihood. And to expect any one human being to keep on top of that throughout their entire life, I think, is an unrealistic ask. And I think imitation is a form of flattery. I appreciate my food by eating it. I appreciate the hair that I wear by wearing it, by putting on the clothes that I wear. And every single item around us in this room could probably be attributed to a certain culture. Do we have to constantly worry about what culture we gain things from?
Does intention have anything to do with it?
Well, I guess I didn't hear anything about anybody worrying about it. What I hear about when I think about and talk about cultural appropriation is people becoming more aware of it. We could say the same thing about racism, sexism, homophobia. Just because you can't solve it and don't see it at every corner doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of it and trying to address it.
Wow, do you really put those on the same level?
I absolutely
Racism
do.
and sexism,
Absolutely.
you put it on the same level as cultural appropriation?
That's exactly.
So if somebody wears their hair like you're wearing it, you put that on the same level as racism?
Absolutely. I put that on the same level as white supremacy because white supremacy is intersectional.
Guys, if you enjoy these videos, please consider leaving a thumbs up on the video. Comment down below, it really helps me out. And if you so choose to, consider subscribing to the channel, help it grow. I hope today will be the day that I earn your subscription. Let's get back to the video.
Okay, well, Will Witt is a former Prager University personality and current editor-in-chief at the Florida Standard. Now, he joins us virtually. Will, what prompted you to make that video?
Well, really, I made that video to prove anti-white ivory tower professors like the one in your studio wrong. I mean, this video and the others that I've made like it with Native Americans, with Mexicans, with the Chinese you just watched are irrefutable evidence that people like that professor are exactly wrong on cultural appropriation. And if we want to go back and we want to talk about the hairstyles and things, just bringing this up, I mean, I've seen people get offended by braids and say, oh, you know, braids are a black people thing and white people can't wear braids. It's called a Dutch braid. It was from back in Nordic times, old Nordic times, with white people, with Vikings, would wear braids, yet people want to come and claim that it's some part of their culture now. No, you can't claim that something is just a part of your culture either. It's for people to share and celebrate and use so you can actually have a society that is cohesive and works together as a melting pot, not all these different groups that can't work together because everyone's so offended. The only people who are actually offended by cultural appropriation don't really have anything else of meaning going on in their lives, it seems.
Yeah.
Well, that's rich.
You say people who get offended by cultural appropriation are people mostly not from that culture. Has that been your experience, whatever the culture was?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, one of the most important videos that I ever did with PragerU is when I went to the Navajo Indian Reservation in Window Rock, Arizona. And all of these Navajos that I talked to didn't want other people to get offended for them on their behalf. They wanted to feel responsible for their own culture. They didn't want someone coming and, for lack of a better word, white knighting them and saying, hey, we need to come here and save you. You know, all these people wearing headdresses and things or a feather in their hair, we need to come and save you. They didn't want that. They wanted people to come and say Geronimo. They wanted planes named the Apache helicopter. They wanted the Washington Redskins as their sports team to celebrate their culture. They didn't want other people getting offended on their behalf. It's a thing created by elitist white people who don't really ever talk to these people in these cultures.
There's no difference between cultural appropriation and just learning from one another. These people are ridiculous. These are people that have nothing else to worry about except for this. These are people that want to be professional victims. And when I say that cultural appropriation is the same as learning from one another, I don't mean that there's never been theft. It doesn't mean that there's not theft between people or culture when it comes to this stuff. Just because you encounter someone's ideas doesn't mean you necessarily have the right to them. But this silly idea that manifesting in your own behavior some elements of another culture, the idea that's essentially immoral, is quite insane. All of us as human beings, as different groups, we have so much to offer one another. It's one of the basis of peace, right? I mean, just looking at hip-hop, right? How many hip-hop artists referencing the Italian mob, calling themselves Gotti or Capone? These people are ridiculous. Like, what, if you're an Islamic man making a pizza on YouTube, you gotta start giving credit to the Italians and find out the roots of it? Give me a break. Who cares? How boring would videos be if you had to listen to an intro on that every time? Let's get back to the video. What's going on here is this weird newly invented boundary beating game that we have amongst group ideologues, these gender ideologues, like men appropriating women is not a problem, right? But appropriating some sort of part of another culture, that's a big issue. This group ideology that we never really had before, not to the extent that we have it now in the West. And you can look at civilizations through time. The ones that focus on the group ideology, it doesn't work out. If there's something good from your culture, something great maybe, wouldn't you want to share that with the world? And if somebody else can take that thing and run with it, maybe make it better, make it bigger, bring it as wide as possible around the globe, why would you not be happy about that? These are people that just want to be offended about something. Are we seriously going to go through the rest of the time with only people from a certain pigment of skin can eat a certain food or talk about a certain food or wear a certain hairstyle? What about art? What about music? Movies? Right? The answer's got to be no. Stuff is there for us to all share as a society. Share our language, share our food, again, share our ideas. Anywhere you go in the world, people are so happy when they see Western people taking part in their culture. Again, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time in Japan. They love it. My wife's Thai. We live in Thailand. My family has long passed away, and her family is still alive and kicking. Makes it easier to raise a family, raise the kids when you have, it takes a village to raise a child. So we live here, and the Thai people, they want you to wear their traditional garb when you go out to the temples and stuff. They absolutely love it. They'll talk to you. They'll ask you about where you're from. And they love sharing their culture with people. And it's the same in most countries. When I was in Tanzania, in Africa, everybody wanted me to try out the traditional African garments, eat their food. They were teaching me how to cook stuff. It's a very Western thing to get offended by that. Not, I shouldn't say Western, a very, like Will Witt just said, if you have time to get offended by cultural appropriation, maybe you don't have anything else good going on in your life. That's it for this video, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please smash that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing to the channel. Help it grow. And I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.